This is Gemara Menachos Daf Chaf Vav. We're holding in Chaf Vav Amud Aleph. We are 4 lines from the top as we begin a new Mishnah. And we like today's share to be an incredible schos. Aliyas Neshama for Yosef ben Nachman Chaim Halevi, whose yard site is on the next day's Daf, which is Chaf Teves B'siyata Dishmaya. The incredible Kayach HaTorah that is generated, Torah of Talmud Torah B'Rabim, should bring an amazing Aliyas Neshama for Nachman, Yosef ben Nachman Chaim Halevi, B'siyata Dishmaya. So we pick it up from the Mishnah on the top of Chavav Amud Aleph, and this Mishnah is really a reminder of a Gemara that we learned many, many moons ago, many years ago, a Gemara in Psachim, that what do we do with a carbon, that the carbon itself is tamei or is lost? Does that make the entire carbon possible? What do we do with the dam? We still have the dam of the carbon. Says Rabbi Yeshua, main basar in dam. If there's no basar at carbon, you cannot bring the dam of the mizbeach. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer argues, and the question is, how does this compute to the world of carbon mincha? Says the Mishnah, nitmu shiraya, nisrafu shiraya, avdu shiraya. If the shirayim, if the remainder became lost, before what? Before the other part of the carbon is brought in the mizbeach. What's the other part of the carbon? What's the part of a mincha that is equivalent to the dam? That's, of course, the kaimetz, the kemitza. So if it was tamei, if it was burnt, if it was lost before the kemitza was brought, says the Mishnah, Kemidas Rav Eliezer Kishera, Kemidas Rav Yeshua Psula. According to Rav Eliezer, that holds dam afal bishin basar, you could bring the dam in the mizbeach even if there's no basar or carbon. So to over here Kishera, you could bring the kemitza even though there's no shirayim. According to Rav Yeshua, nah. It says the Gemara Marav Ushanitmu Kol Shireho. This machlokes, this din in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua in the Mishnah that holds its psula is only if all the shirayim is tamei. Avol miksa shireh loy, but it's only part of it, then it will not become tamei. Says the Gemara, what does Rav mean? Because al gadaitach, we think as follows: nitma in avod v'saraf loy. The Rav said a specific case. If you remember, the Mishnah had 3 cases. The Mishnah had a case of nitmu, the Mishnah had a case of nisrfu, the Mishnah had a case of nevdu. Rav only said nitmu. So says the Gemara, we think right now that Rav was precise, that he was talking about a case of nitma, but not a case of nevad, not a case of nisraf. Why not? Micah Savar. If Rav holds that the leftovers, that's not lost, that's not tamei, is significant, then if you love it visar of nami, then it should be even where it was lost or burnt. And he can say v'nitma. And if you're going to tell me the shirayim is not significant, v'nitma my time. So why by nitma is he saying that according to Rav Yeshua it's possible? Because because nitma, which reminds us of the previous sugya, is a specific din. Nitma has a specific allowance, and the fact that the tzitz of the kohen gadol is meratza, says the Gemara. But if that is true, yachi kol shirah nami. It should be even if all of the shirayim became tamei, because the tzitz is meratza. It's not only if it's nitmu. It's not only miksa shirah loy. Says the Gemara, you're right. Loylam, 2 lines on the white lines. Kasavar, Rav holds shirah milsahi v'nitma v'uadin lavan v'saruf. It says the Gemara, you're right. It's not only nitma. It's also nevad. It's also saruf. So why did Rav zero in on nitma? V'hai dekamar nitma. You know why? Reishayu nokat. Because Rav says the first of all the cases in the Mishnah, almost like you will quote the first of a list of items, but of course you're referring to the whole list. And says the Gemara, let's bring a raya to the sheet of Rav. That Rabbi Yeshua is not going to say it's possible when part of the shirayim remain. Kiditani Rabbi Yeshua Omer Kol Azvacha Shabbat Torah. Shenishtayir Mem Kzayis Basar Kzayis Chelev Zayrigas Adam. Kechatzeis b'atzuk chatzeis chaylev v'nezarik es adam. Ubeoila. Afilu kechatzeis b'atzuk chatzeis chaylev. Zarik adam. Why? Meisha kulai kalil. Ube minchan. Here's the punchline. Afilu kula kayames. Loy yizroik. Even all of it remains. It does not. There's no din of zrika. Says the Gemara. What? Mincha ma'av. We're talking about the dam. We're talking about the zrika. There's no dam in a carbon mincha. Amar Baba minchas nisachim. Minchas nisachim is the mincha that comes together with an animal carbon, and that's what it's referring to. I would have thought the minchas nisachim is coming together with a carbon. Therefore, it's considered like the zevach himself, and therefore, even if the basar and the chaylev is no longer, you could do the zrikas adam kamashmala, and the Bryce says nain. The Bryce says no, you cannot do the zrikas adam unless you have some basar, you have some chaylev. So says the Gemara. So we see a raya to shitas of Yeshua that you can only do the zrika if some of the basar, if some of the chaylev remains. How do you know that? Minahani mili. Amar Rav Yechon misham Yishmael u'matu misham Yeshua ben Chananya. Amar cross says the pasuk. V'hikter achaylev the reach nichayach Lashem chaylev avol b'shein basar. You see that there's chaylev. Either you could do a zrika even if there is no basar. V'ashkan chaylev yoseres yishtei kalayos minolan. Where do we know that if the yoseres, the diaphragm is around, the shtei kalayos, the kidneys are around, that's also enough to do the zrika? Tekatani says the Gemara, as we learned in a brayso, b'mincha afilu kula kayames lo yizrak. Mincha udla yizrak. Kayoseres shtei kalayos yizrak. You would have to do the zrika. Min alon, Rav Yechon didei amar, l'reach nichayach, kol sha'ata mala l'reach nichayach. Anything that's brought as nichayach, anything that is brought on the mizbeach is enough to do the zrika. And the Gemara concludes part A of today's shir. Ve'etzrach l'michtav chaylev, ve'etzrach l'michtav l'reach nichayach. Di, because of chaylev, ava min chaylev, in yoseres shtei kalayos loi, because of rachman reach nichayach. Because Rachmana l'reach nichayach hamin afilu mincha because Rachmana chaylev, and that is the balance between the two. And so we see that according to Yeshua, if any of them, if the chaylev, the basar, if any part of the basar remains, you're able to do the zrikas hadam. We continue with the next Mishnah, which discusses, as we've learned already, that where is the kemitza placed? It's placed into a kli shares. You do the kemitza, you put it into another kli shares, which is mekadishet, and then you take it and you bring it on the mizbeach. The question is, what happens if you did the kemitza, but you failed to put it in a kli shares? What do we do now? Says the Mishnah, shlei b'kli shares, possible of Rav Shimon machshir, hekter kaim sai. If you burn the kaimetz pa'amayim 2 times, Kshira, it's going to be kosher. Instead of bringing the entire kaimetz at one, you brought it in 2 different halves, it's going to be kosher. So says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda Rei Rav Chia, my time, dear Rabbi Shimon. Amar Kra says the Torah, Kodesh Kodash Amika Chatas V'Chasham. Zok the Torah regarding a minchot, Kodesh Kodash and Chatas and Asham. What does this show us? That there's 2 ways of doing the carbon mincha. La'bal of the biyad. If you want to bring it by hand, you don't want to bring it in a kli shares. Oivda biyamin kechatas. Lashon, if you have kechatas, he offers his right hand that do it like a chatas. Ubikli, if he wants to bring in a kli of the bismal kashim, so you could bring kodesh kadashim. The carbon mincha is kodesh kadashim kechatas v'kashim, meaning that if you're bringing it without a kli, it's like a chatas brought with your right hand. If you bring it with a kli, it's brought with your left hand like an asham. That's the reason why Rav Shimon says you do not necessarily have to put it into a kli sharis. Rav Yanai Omar says Rav Yanai, Kivin shekam say kli sharis. Once the kohen has done the kamitz from a kli sharis, ma'alehu maktira yafilu behem yanai. He brings it up and he burns it, even with his sash, vafilu b'mikidush al cheres, and even an earthenware pot. So what do we see? Says Rav Shimon, there's no kli sharis necessary, nor do you even have to use your yad yamin, your right hand. And the third sheet of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, hakol moedim, everyone agrees. Bekaimet shetan kiddush, everyone agrees that you need to be mekadesh in a kli sharis, and the machlekes is only the subsequent avodas if that is done. I mean, the original kemitza avada has to be placed in a kli sharis. The question is, what happens after that? Rav Tanakama says all the avodas need a kli sharis, and Rav Shimon says no, only the original kemitza does. Meisvei frakti gemara. Hektar chalav and veivarim. If you burn the fat's limbs, veitim or the wood, shelon that were brought up, bein biyad, bein bikli, bein biyamin, bein bismol. What's the halacha? Ksherim. Ha'kaimitz v'akteris alavayna shelon bein biyad, bein bikli, bein biyamin, bein bismol. Ksherim. Tiyofta the Rav Yudabred Rav Chia, a straight up kasha. We see you don't need to use the right hand. Excuse me, Katani Bim Bimin, and then Bikli Bim 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 small. So we split up the brisa, and then it's no longer a kasha. Tashimas, 8 lines from the bottom of the 2 dots. Let's bring a raya. Kamsai Shalai Bikli Shares. If you did a kemitza without a kli shares, the kitchen shall be kli shares, and you were makadesh it without a kli shares. You brought it up and you burnt it without a kli shares. What's halacha in these cases? Pasal Rav Shimon machshirin. Rav Shimon says it's kosher b'matan kli as long as it's placed in a kli. So what do we see? We see it's a kasher of Menachos bar Yitzchak, who says, Rav Shimon says it must go into kli shari. So here, as long as it's in any kli, it's going to suffice. Responds the Gemara, Ema mimatan kli ve'elach. You know what the brisa means? So the placement of the kli, meaning he has to go into the kli for a moment, and then he can go weiter. Tashima another kli sharis. Case that comes to kli sharis mekacha kli sharis malo maktir kli sharis. Rav Shimon Aimer Kivan comes to kli sharis malo maktir shloi kli sharis. Vidayo, says Rav Shimon, that will be enough. So what do we see? See that according to Rav Shimon, you do not need to be makadesh in the kli sharis. Kasher Menachos bar Yitzchak. Says the Gemara, Ema responds, Kivan comes to kli sharis. The brisa means once you remove the kaimitz, once you're makadesh it with the kli sharis, ma'alayu maktiroi, then vidayo. I mean, there's a step that the brisa skipped over. Tashema, another raya. If you did the kemitza with the right hand, you put it in your left hand, put it back in the right hand. If he did it with his left hand, and while the kemitza is in the left hand, he has a machshava bein chutz l'mekayim bein chutz l'zmanai. A machshava is pegel. What's the halacha? Pasal, but ve'ein bai kares. Biyamina, now it's different girsais over here, but let's just go with the girsa that now the Gemara says either lashna achrina, but it says biyamina. That's the Tanakam. Rav Shimon. Excuse me, not Devei. I read that wrong. Divri, Rav Shimon, not Tanakam. V'chachamim argue, Aimrim Kiv Shenas L'Smol, Paisaltoi B'Matanasai. The placing is Pasal. So my time, what's the reason? Mishan Dabai Kedusha Bekli, V'Kiv Shenas L'Smol, Nase Kedam Shenishach Mitzavar Behima, Ala Ritzba. Now, once you place it in the left hand, it has a din. It's as if, like the dam spilled onto the floor. V'asvay, and you gathered it together. Shabbos, it's going to be possible. So says the Gemara, let's understand this brisa. It sounds like Rav Shimon do not require putting it into a kli. Tiyofta de Rav Nachman. Tiyofta. Because Nachman was the opinion that says, according to Rav Shimon, you do need to be mekadesh b'kli sharis. And we see clearly in this brisa, not. Says the Gemara of Tekasha on Rav Nachman and the Rav Yehuda Breder Rav Chia Misayea le Rav Yanai Misayea le Shvi Araya. Says Gemara, the Rav Yana Nami Lema Tiyofta. Amlecha Rav Yana and Adamri Kitana de Hikter V'Lav Litzadim Katani. Says Rav Yani, that I say that the vine may be done with the sash of the kohen is like the Tana regarding the burning, who says according to Rav Shimon you can do it with your left hand. The lav l'stadim katani, the Bryce is not saying two different cases. And we're at the two dots, about 12 lines down, and we quote the last part of the Mishnah. Hector comes up hamayim kshira. If you took the kaimetz and you split it in half and you brought each half separately, it is kshira. Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi b'mayim v'lo pa'amei pa'mayim. Only if you did it 2 times, but not many times. Rav Yochanan Amar pa'mayim avilu pa'may pa'mayim. As many times as you split it up, it's going to be kosher. My beinayo Amar Rav Zir yish kaimetz pachos mishnei zeitim v'yish aktara b'chusa mikazayis. The difference is if there's a kaimetz less than 2 zeitim, and if you could burn it less than a kazayis, you could beinayu. Rav Shua ben Levi Savar in comes back on Mishnei Kizeisim in Aktar B'chusa Mikizayis. V'yochna Savi Shot B'chusa Kizeisim V'shaktara B'chusa Mikizayis. Continues the Gemara. Let's bring a raya. Itmar, another case regarding the din of Kimitza, the 2 dots Makam Alamed. Kaimetz means they matter Shiraya Be'achila. The Kaimetz, at what point does it matter? The Shirayim, the remainder, to be eaten. Rav Chanina Amar Misha. Mashla ba'is ar, when the fire takes hold of it. Rav Yochanan Amar mishetatz ba'is ar, when you ignite most of it. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Le Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchak Azbil times Rav Yochanan tell you the reasoning Amar Kra. V'nei Allah iktir v'nei Allah kitar aretz ki kitar hakivshan. The smoke of the land goes up like smoke of the furnace in kivshan. Ma lekitar hashetatzis. But it's only going to be smoke when most of it is lit. So that's the right that we need most of it is lit. Amar lei Ravin bar Rav Adil Rava Amri Tamiltcha Amar Rav Amrim your Talmidim the name Rav Amram Tani V'Am Tanabrayis Ein Li Ela Dvarim Sheruba Shedarka Nikar Valayla. It says only items whose manner is to be brought at night, which is what? What part of a carbon is brought at night? Konevarim Upadarim Shemal Numaktirim Mivay Shemesh. That they're brought up and they are burned by Shemesh after sunset. And then they're continued to be consumed throughout the entire night. Kula. So why are you telling me that this is included? Says the Gemara, Misachlin v'Eichlin kol halayla. Kar Elim ba Shemesh Misachlin v'Eichlin kol halayla. Minayin Tamalaymer Zayis Tayis Hayla Riba. That comes to be Marbe. Ivan ba Shemesh Loy Mishkachas Lo Shatzes Arba Ruba. But with the sun coming up, it's impossible that it should ignite most of it. Like Kasha kan Bilokot kan le hatir kan liklight. One is talking about the acceptance to be brought on the Mizbeach. One is actually to permit. Rav Elazar, Masla B'vay Shemesh, Elazar says, following sunset, Umukim La, and how does he answer it up? B'paikin, he's talking about, the Bryce is talking about that it bursts off the top of the Mizbeach, as we've seen. V'chenki also Rav Dimi, Amar Rav Yanai Paikin, Mi Amar Rav Yanai, Hachi V'raktimar, Amar Rav Yanai, Keter Shapakta Kol, Me'alkam Yizech, Avilu Kartan Shaba, Ein Machzirin Oisa. You don't return it to the Mizbeach if it comes off. But then Rav Chanina Bar Minyumi, B'divei, Rav Loz B'Yakov, Asher Toichel Eish, says the Basik, is Oila al Mizbeach. From there we learn out, Ikulei Oila Tamachzer, Yata Machzer, Ikulei Ketairis. You don't put it back on the Mizbeach. Says Zimar, you're right. Sami Mikan Ketairis, leave from the word Ketairis. You're right, it will not be brought back. And therefore we don't have a kasha. We'll pick it up from Ravasi in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.